Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Nimm von uns, Herr, du treuer Gott, which translates to, Take from us, you faithful God. This is an interesting chorale for, maybe the main reason is the fact that we see a lot of minor dominance in this chorale, at least the way that I analyze it. But yeah, it's an interesting chorale that lacks leading tone, kind of similarly to the two chorales that we just looked at recently. We see some leading toneless 5 chords, and here we see 5 chords that are fully spelled and lack the leading tone for a different reason, because they occur with the diatonic 7th of the scale rather than the leading tone that is artificially added to minor scales to create that cadential movement. But we're not seeing them really used in cadential situations. We are seeing them used in the middle of the phrase, so that probably plays a role as well. So let's just hop right into the analysis. 1 flat in the key signature. We start on D minor. We end on D major, so I reckon we're in the key of D minor to start things off. Looking at our first complete phrase, we have C sharp, A, E, and A. It's 5-6. 1, 5, 6. It's like the most common chord progression you'll find at the beginning of a chorale. And then we go D, A, D, and F, which is a tonic triad in root position. This E is just a 9/8 suspension over the bass. We then have B flat, D, and G. That's G minor over B flat. That's a 4/6 chord. That then goes to D minor in first inversion, F, A, D, and A, which is 1/6. And as we get ready for our perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor, we have G, B flat, D, and F. That's G minor 7 in root position. That's a 4/7 chord. We then have A, E, C sharp, and E. That's A major in root position. That's our 5 chord. That's our dominant. This F sharp, or this F natural, is a leading tone. This G is our 7th, but wait, did I say that F is our leading tone? Sorry, I meant to say that F is a non-chord tone. This G is a non-chord tone as well. It's a 7th that then goes down to F, which is part of a D minor chord, D, F, A, and D. 4-5-1, pretty straightforward cadence. Now this next phrase, depending on how you look at it, it could briefly go to the key of F major, which is kind of what it sounds like to me. I kind of have more of like a jazz-related relationship with tonality, so it's not uncommon for tunes to move via 2-5-1s in really any direction. You can kind of copy and paste or just move around the entirety of the circle of fifths. However, I analyzed this entire section in D minor because it is analyzable in D minor, and it didn't quite convince me enough that we were in the key of F for me to warrant or a modulation. So we do have a half cadence in the key of D minor at the end of it, but we'll go ahead and see what ends up happening as we get through the phrase. So we have D, F, D, D, F, and A. That's another tonic triad root position. No need to reanalyze. Passing tone in the bass. We then have F, C, F, and A. That's F major in root position. This is where your F major analysis would kick off if you were saying we modulated to the key of F. 3 would become 1, or you could say 6 would become, or 1 would become 6 here, and then we can go to 1, but 6 of one, half dozen of another. But then we have E, C, G, and G with a passing tone in the alto. That's C major over E. In the key of D, that's a subtonic 7th chord in first inversion. We then have A minor, not A major, A, C, E, and C. Notice how the leading tone is not present, and the note that would be the leading tone if it were present, these C's, is doubled. It's interesting. So we have C going to A minor here. That would be in the key of D minor, our 5 chord, and that goes back to F major, F, C, F, and A, which is our 3 chord in root position, spelled the same way as it was on beat 1. And as we're getting ready for our cadence, we have B flat, B flat, B flat, D, and F. That's a 6 chord, so 3 going to 6 is a good sign because that follows the cycle of falling fifths. And 6 is one of those chords that can go to a predominant or it can go directly to the dominant. It's kind of a flexible chord, either functioning as a tonic chord or a predominant. We then have B flat, D, D, and G. That is G minor over B flat, another 4/6 chord, kind of like a substitute for 2 as well. That then goes to 5. A, E, C sharp, and A, which is our 5 chord. Now, if you remember, when we have flat 6 going to 5 on the bass in the context of a half cadence, it's called a Phrygian half cadence. It's not super important that you know that, but the half step movement is an archetype of the Phrygian mode, that half step. So if we look at the 5 chord as our tonic just for this brief moment, it's like we have the flat 2 of the scale going to the tonic. So I think that's why it's called a Phrygian half cadence. That's how I've always made sense of it. But regardless, it's a half cadence. It's been categorized in the textbook that way, so I'll point it out as I see it. Now, if you wanted to analyze this in the key of F major, we can call this a 1 chord. This C chord is 5. Then we have a deceptive progression going to A minor, which is 3. Then we go directly from 3 to 1, which is kind of an unusual progression, but I'd say it's less unusual than minor 5 going to 3, or maybe equally unusual, just from like how often it comes up in my analysis. And I think this B flat right here would be where we would modulate. This 6 chord is now our 4 chord. Or sorry, this 4 chord is now our 6 chord. And I'd say that actually the F major analysis looks cleaner and generally more normative than what we would expect here. But I don't know, it just doesn't quite sound like we've modulated. That's just me, though. I don't know. Maybe it sounds like it modulates to you. If that's the case, then here's the analysis in F major. I think it's equally as valid, but to me, it doesn't quite sound like we've modulated just yet. Okay, moving ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence again in the key of D minor. So we have first beat in our phrase here, D minor, D, F, D, and A. It's our tonic triad in root position. That then goes to A minor, A, E, and C natural. That's just a minor dominant, really no splitting hairs here. This A is a lower suspension. It's like a 4/5 suspension, or I guess it could also be like a 7/8 suspension, depending on how you look at it. But here it's kind of interesting because if we look at the downbeat, we have A, D, G, and D. That G, if it resolved down, would be A, B flat, G, and D. If we just took the G and not the E here, it would be a G minor chord. But with the E, it's E diminished, which is 2/6 because it's over G, E, G, B flat, and G. However, I think another way that we could also analyze this is 7/6 of 3 in the context in which it's being presented, because 2/6 typically is succeeded by 5. But here we have it being succeeded by 3, which is kind of interesting. So this G is it's actually this D, that's the non-chord tone here happening on the downbeat, or on the numbered beat on the harmonic rhythm. And we have 2 simultaneous non-chord tones that are moving in opposite direction in contrary motion. And then we have F, C, A, and F, which is our 3 chord, right? So we have some adjacent harmony here, chords that are going in this numerical order in terms of the scale degrees, which is not uncommon to see in Bach. We do see it from time to time. We will see some later as well. But yeah, it's not the most common progression, but it's by no means uncommon. So just to gauge in terms of like how often you see it. Here we have G, B flat, G, and E, which is another E diminished chord in first inversion, 2/6. Then we have some passing tones here. We have A, C, G, and E. And I guess depending on how you look at this, you could say that this was these 2 are non-chord tones, and then it's really these 2 that are what's being emphasized. But I think because if you fully spell this is just a minor 5/7 chord, which is unusual. I don't think we've seen one before in the chorales up until this point. But 2 wants to go to 5 regardless of whether or not the leading tone is present. So I'm going to mark it as a passing chord because 2 going to 5 is a common progression. And then that goes to B flat, D, F, and D, which is a 6 chord, so a deceptive progression. Passing tone in the alto. I guess technically speaking, if you look at this passing tone as well as the chord tone here, you could call this 4-6-5. We've already seen another 4-7 chord here, and apologies, it's not uppercase, it's lowercase because we're in D minor, but you could call it 4-6-5 depending on how you hear it. But I really do think this is just a passing tone. But it has been a theme in a couple of other chords that we've seen thus far, so I'd offer that analysis. 6 we again have going to 5, like we do in the... Oh no, I'm sorry, we had a 6 in a cadential situation earlier, but it was followed by not 5, but another predominant chord. Here we have A major, A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord. Notice how the melody has the C sharp, which is interesting. Typically the melodies are older, so they're kind of devoid of the leading tone because the melodies are generally simpler and not quite purely tonal yet. Like you could contextualize them in a tonal fashion, but they weren't composed by tonal composers necessarily. They were typically a byproduct of an older time musically, so it was the supporting voices that would create the tonal trajectory, even though the melody had, tonal qualities to it. It wasn't quite codified yet when they were being composed. But regardless, the cadence ends with our tonic triad, D minor, D, F, A, and D, root position. And then we have an interesting progression here. I think we start off in the key of C major, and the reason why I say C major here, even though we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor at the end of it, is just because when we're analyzing this, I'm really thinking about how much we've heard up until that point. If you hear a G chord and then you hear it followed by C, as sort of after your palate's been cleansed by the end of a phrase, it sounds like you're in the key of C major, even if it's only 2 beats. So I don't think taking this entire phrase and putting it in A minor, even though you could, is quite doing it justice, because there's no reason at this point to believe that we're in the key of A minor. You would have to look at the rest of the score and make that decision after having heard it. But this section undeniably sounds like C major. This is a G major chord, which would be 5, G, B, G, and D. We then have a C major chord, C, C, G, and E, which is our tonic triad, and it also happens to be where we modulate to the key of A minor. And I know what you're thinking, it's like, wow, a chord, or a key rather, that is only over 2 beats. Well, like I just said, it's like I don't really have any reason to believe that we're in the key of A minor at this point. It just doesn't sound like we're in the key of A minor. It sounds like we're in C, undeniably. It's where it happens in the phrase, and it's the fact that it feels like we have breached into a new section. But we're unquestionably moving towards A minor following this C major chord. So even though it's short, this is kind of an anomaly in the sense that if this were to have happened in the middle of the phrase, it might have even been a secondary dominant. It might not have even felt like a tonicization. It might have just felt like a cycle of falling fifths. But like I said, this is happening at the beginning of the phrase. We have no reason to think that we're going to the key of A minor. So I'm analyzing linearly here. That being said, passing tone in the tenor, we then have D, A, F sharp, and D. That's D major in root position, and this isn't a secondary dominant or anything. This is a harmonization of the melodic minor scale. So you can see this fragment that we have here in the alto, such as an uppercase 4 chord. And then we have some passing tones in the bass and the alto with this E right here that is an on-chord tone as well. And if we look at all of those, we have E, E, G sharp, and D, which is a 5-7 chord, E7 without the 5th. So we have some adjacent harmony here, 3, 4, 5. Then we keep going up to 6, 7, and then our tonic, but the harmony breaks its adjacency here. We have F sharp, E, A, and C, and I don't think that that's 6. I mean, you could make the argument that that is, in fact, a 6 half diminished 7 chord. However, I think that this E is an accented non-chord tone, and what we really have here is a 4-6-5 chord. It's actually a D7 chord over F sharp. And then that goes to another 5-6 chord. Here we have G sharp, another 5 chord, G sharp, D, E, and B, which is E7 over G sharp. That's 5-6-5. And it's interesting, but both this E and this D are non-chord, they're chord tones, so we don't mark them, which is kind of weird on the page. It looks kind of like naked to me because I'm used to marking them. But regardless, those are chord tones, and this resolves where we would expect to 1 in root position: A minor, A, C, E, and A, which is our tonic triad. This F here kind of fakes this out, makes it feel kind of like a 6 chord in passing, but I don't really think it contributes too much to the chord progression. But you know what? I'll mark it. Might as well. You do see 1 to 6 with some frequency. We then have D, sorry, I'm reading my clefs wrong, D, D, A, and B natural, which is a fifthless, actually it's preceded by the fifth, but a fifthless 2 chord, a 2-6-5 chord. We know that that's what's being implied, but there's no fifth in the chord, and that's what gives it the diminished sound, which is kind of interesting. But then on the offbeat, actually 6 going to 2, that makes sense, so I'm glad that I did mark that. But on the offbeat we have E, B, G sharp, and B. That is a root position E major triad, that's a 5 chord, before we cadence on A minor, A, C, E, and A, which is our tonic triad. Very dense cadence here, and I feel like and not all cadences have as much like granular harmony, because they are contrapuntal and sometimes the chords are harder to pick out. However, in this case, when the chords are easier to pick out, you can see that there actually is a lot of chordal movement that happens in the contrapuntal cadences that Bach composed in his chorales. Moving ahead to the next phrase, we have movement back to the key of C major, and then we end the phrase with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of F major. So we can call this A minor chord our 6 in the key of C major. That then goes to G major in first inversion, B, G, D, and D, which is 5-6. And that goes to our tonic triad, C, G, E, and C, C major. That then goes to another interesting chord. We see this progression with some frequency in Bach. We B diminished in root position, 7-6, D, F, F, and B, which is a 7-6 chord. This D is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And that goes to C major, but not just any C major, a C major with a passing B flat. And if you've watched any of my videos in the past, we might be tempted to call this a 1 chord, but I think it's actually functioning as a secondary dominant. I think it's actually 5 of 4, because the tonic in a major key and in a minor key, they both are also the dominant of the subdominant, 5 of 4. And it's the B flat that lets me know that we're moving back to the key, or back to the realm of 1 flat, or in our case F major, because we do need to distinguish the difference between D minor and F major. They share a pitch collection, just they're contextualized differently, right? They have different tonics, and one is C sharp in many cases, but we're moving to the key of F here, and this C chord is now our 5. We then go to F major, F, C, F, and A, which is our tonic. And as we get ready for our cadence, we have B flat, D, F, and A, which is similar to the cadence that we had first. It's a 4-7 chord. B flat major is our subdominant, and this has a major 7th. We then have C major, C, G, E, and G, which is our 5 chord, like we had right here. And we even have the same little ornament here, the 7th here, that little brief passing tone that then goes to F major, which is our tonic, F, A, C, and F. Moving ahead to our last phrase, we end with a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor, and I think we modulate pretty much straight away. We start off with this F chord being our 3 chord, and then we have an interesting kickoff to our adjacent harmony that I was talking about earlier. We have F sharp, A, D, and A, which is not a harmonization of the A melodic minor scale, but actually a secondary dominant. In this case, this is D over F sharp, which would be the dominant in first inversion of G, and G is our subdominant, so that would be 5, 6 of 4. And that goes exactly where we would expect: G minor, G, G, D, and B flat, which is G minor in root position. Passing 7th in the tenor, and then we get A, E, C sharp, and A, which is our dominant triad in root position, our 5 chord. Passing 7th in the melody. We then get B flat, D, and F, 3, 4, 5, and 6. B flat is our submediant. That goes to an interesting chord. If we look here, it kind of looks like we have a dominant happening without the third, without the third, A, E, and G. But this B flat here kind of complicates things. It's, I think, part of a 9/10 suspension in the bass. This A is a non-chord tone, and what we really have is B flat, E, and G, which is, G, B flat, E, and G, which is E diminished over G. That's 2, 6, and 6 going to 2 is a good sign because that's the cycle of falling fifths and where it typically wants to go. And we're getting ready for our cadence here, so 2, 6 is a typical dominant chord, so we would expect some sort of dominant afterwards, and we kind of get that. This C sharp, we see the A, but we also see F and B flat, so this B flat is a suspension, and actually this C sharp is an accented non-chord tone, and what we're really looking at is A, D, and F, because however you permute it, looks kind of like there's an augmented triad here, some weird altered dominant if you look literally on the downbeat, but if you look afterwards, the resolution going in opposite directions, up and down, spells D minor over A, which is a tonic triad in second inversion, which we do see with some frequency in cadential situations, and in non-cadential situations too, but mostly in cadential situations. And we expect this to go to 5, A, G, D, and E, but this D is a suspension, and it's actually this A and this C sharp here that occur, and it actually takes the 7th away when we resolve this 4/3 suspension over the bass. The 7th goes away, which is kind of interesting. So we're just going to call this a 5 chord, even though this, and we'll call this G a non-chord tone too, I guess. Even though it's kind of, a 7th and a 5/7 chord really doesn't take away, or it's not the same type of non-chord tone like this A is in this 2/6 chord. It's very close in relation, but it is not part of just a 5 triad. It's part of a 5/7 chord, so you can call this a 7 chord if you wanted to. The resolution and where the chord gets realized happens at the C sharp, so the fact that the 7th is no longer present in the chord is why my analysis leans more towards 5 rather than 5/7. But it's up to you. I think both analyses are correct. And then I added that little bracket there just to indicate that the 1, 6, 4 and the 5 often go to are often related to one another in the context of a cadence. And then we cadence on D major, D, F sharp, A, and D, which is our major tonic. And in minor chorales, Bach often cadences on the major tonic via the Picardy third. I think he just likes to end his minor chorales on more of an uplifting note, seeing that they are the last movement in his cantatas. And that is today's analysis. I hope you enjoyed the video. There's a couple of interesting things. I'd say the most interesting aspects of the chorale come in the form of the minor dominants that occur in and around the ambiguous D minor / F major section here, kind of a modal section if they're being used sort of interchangeably. The more I think about it, the more I'm leaning more towards F, but that's, I think, mostly because of my bias in terms of the way that the analysis looks on the page, and I should be okay with analysis not looking very normative in the context of like a real world example. But we also have a minor dominant very clearly in the key of D minor, so it really is being okay with the fact that sometimes the leading tone isn't present in the chord, and Bach just writes the way that he wanted to write. So, but yeah, little interesting twists and turns here, like a moderately interesting chorale, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by watching this video. If you're interested in following me along on this journey to analyze all of Bach's chorale harmonizations, feel free to subscribe and click the notification icon so that you can be notified when I upload, which is once a day at varying times during the day. So you'll get the video at some point during the day. But regardless, I'm working through the chorale harmonizations right now, and there are a ton of them. I'm only about a quarter of the way through them right now, so there are lots of videos scheduled for the future, at least another year's worth. So, or actually, a little less than a year's worth. I've been pumping out these videos, so I'm less than a year away, about 11 months away. So I have that to look forward to. I hope you're looking forward to it as well. And again, thank you so much for watching the video. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.